You might know Dan Wilson as the Idaho Sheriff, or for his run for Kootenai County Sheriff back in 2024, where he went head-to-head with the system and didn't exactly make a lot of friends doing it. But before that, Dan spent damn near 25 years running heavy construction and commercial casework, working on major projects for medical, government agencies, and even the Department of Defense. This isn't a man who talks in theories. He's been in the weeds managing big crews, big budgets, with real consequences when shit goes sideways. On top of that, he's also spent 12 years as commissioned reserve police officer, running single car patrol, and taking the same risks as full-time cops, the same calls, but not for the paycheck. Because he believed in serving his community, he donated thousands of hours and over $250,000 worth of his own time, doing the work most people only talk about. When his campaign peeled back some of the ugly truths about how deeply broken and protected certain systems can be, he didn't walk away, he doubled down. And now, that fight has turned into Liberty Without Compromise, the only live local broadcast focused entirely on what's happening in Kootenai County, calling out corruption, abuse of power, the kind of bullshit that only survives when nobody is willing to talk about it. Bottom line, Dan isn't here for politics, clout, or playing nice. He's here to protect the people who don't have a voice, hold powerful folks accountable, and tell the truth, whether it makes him popular or not. And today, we're going to be getting into all of it. Mr. Dan?
Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely.
Looking forward to this conversation.
So am I. Yeah, absolutely, so am I. Tell me what the hell's going on in our community.
Well, I think what we have going on is typical of just about every community. You have people that have human nature, and human nature, when it is unchecked, eventually leads to pockets of corruption or bad deeds. And so it's not unique just to Kootenai County, but I happen to live in Kootenai County, and so this is where I started digging in, and where I really began to find out really the backbone of what Kootenai County currently looks like and what's happening here.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially when powerful people get in these positions, they do not want to let them go.
Yeah.
So what was something, because I didn't even know how dirty that election got, that you were running for. How did that make you feel? When you were just trying to do what's best for our community, and then you start getting attacked, and I'm sure you lost friends.
Yeah, it was surprising because when I ran on a platform of things that I thought needed to be done in order to protect liberty right here in our own county.
Yeah.
You know, when it comes to government, federal, state, county is the most important government because it affects our daily lives. And so when I presented at my opening kickoff for the campaign back in December of 23, I did so with these ideas of things that I thought needed to happen in order to better secure our county. What I didn't realize is that I wasn't going to face opposition from the typical Democrat, left, liberal-leaning part of the county. What I ended up fighting was the so-called political right here in Kootenai County. That is the Republican Central Committee, the churches, and my strategy within 60 days completely turned from what it originally I intended it to be, which is, you know, go out and run on this platform of saying the current sheriff, Republican. I mean, it's crazy in a heavy Republican county to challenge the sitting Republican sheriff.
Yeah.
But I really saw when I first observed him in motion and realized what a weak, pathetic man that he is. Somebody that had 30 years of so-called experience in the largest sheriff's office in the country, Los Angeles County. I was shocked at what I saw was a lack of vision, a lack of action, a lack of preparing this county. And so it's crazy to go after a sitting Republican when you're running as a Republican. And that's what we did, but we found out very quickly that the Republican Central Committee, all they are is lip service. So they'll preach to everybody in the community how important morality is and conservative values, but behind the scenes, they're some of the most dirtiest operatives that I've ever encountered.
Is Bob Norris corrupt?
I believe he is corrupt, yes. It's my personal belief.
Well, that's why you always want somebody in that office who is local, not from LA. Do you think, because I think I heard you talking about he takes money from out-of-state donors?
Yeah, I mean, money from out-of-state donors isn't inherently bad.
Sure.
When people heard my message, I had people that were supporters from out-of-state that gave. But you want to be watching more of what kind of industries that are attached.
Sure.
So, Norris in the 2020 election, when he ran against Captain Mike Bauer, who is also from Los Angeles County, he was receiving at that time, Mike Bauer tried to set the alarm, not only locally, but also with the state Secretary of State office. There's a hamburger chain in Los Angeles County called Tam's Hamburgers, and a guy by the name of Chris Bobos is the owner of that, happened to be a reserve deputy in Los Angeles under the corrupt Sheriff Baca and his under Sheriff Tanaka. Of course, they later on were indicted and went to federal prison because of their violations of civil rights. The most corrupt administration that Los Angeles County had ever encountered up to date. And so Chris Bobos was tied into Sheriff Baca as a special donor, a special deputy. Bobos never went through an academy, never went through the chops of becoming a real reserve officer, but what he was given was this special status because he was a donor. And Bob Norris helped handle him when Bob was a sergeant or lieutenant at the county sheriff's office. So when this money was coming in, out of state, $3,000 and $4,000, maxing out the maximum contributions, Mike Bauer was bringing this up saying, hey, something's not right here, this is laundered money. And he was kicked aside. We brought the same issue up starting in December of 23, and by January of 2024, the Los Angeles Times ended up printing an article where Tam's Hamburger was fined by the state of California for laundering money through straw men donors. And so they were taking money to the tune of $15,000 per candidate, and I think a total of $50,000. And they were going to hamburger store managers and saying, here, you donate this under your name to Sheriff Villanueva. And Villanueva was caught through this whole, illegal operation of money laundering campaign finances, and was fined over $50,000 and given 2 misdemeanors. So the same hamburger chain that was donating to Villanueva in the Los Angeles Times, I think it was January 14th of 2024, put this story out. It's the exact same operation that Captain Mike Bauer was saying, why is Los Angeles a little hamburger stand that's known for money laundering to campaigns, giving money to Bob Norris? That right there should be a clue as to what is Bob Norris doing coming up to Kootenai County from Los Angeles, deciding that he needs to run for sheriff, the most powerful office of the county, the most important elected official that you can elect in your county, the one that is the ultimate law enforcement officer that protects all the people and their constitutional rights. Bob Norris also received, in the last election that I ran against him, about $5,000 from the cannabis industry. Jason and Sheena, I'm going to get their name incorrect, but Badadi, donated to Bob maximum contributions, each of them, husband and wife, in the primary and in the general election. And I believe it's Peter Gamby from California that also gave to Bob. Bob is also friends with billionaire Don Ahern from Ahern Rentals out of Las Vegas. So there is a lot of real estate development, construction, and cannabis industry that amounted to over 10% of the total funds that Bob raised for his sheriff race in Kootenai County. We need to ask ourselves, why are outside influences from California, 2 states away, 2 or 3 states away, what is their interest in Kootenai County?
Yeah.
And these are the things that we would bring up and say, Bob Norris worked under the model of Baca and Tanaka, and which was pay to play. That means you donate, Bob Norris donated $600 to Paul Tanaka's Gardenia mayoral race. While he was under sheriff, he also ran for Gardenia mayor and was favorable to Bob giving promotions from sergeant eventually to lieutenant. So this whole model that Bob Norris brought up to Cootie County is exactly mirror image of what was happening down in Los Angeles. And I say, as a person that has grown up in this region my entire life, I grew up next door in Spokane Valley, 20 miles, east of here. This is not the values of the people in Cootie County. And so this was just one of the many things that we began to uncover. Of course, Bob Norris retired right when Baca and Tanaka, his mentors, were being indicted with their federal charges of civil rights violations regarding their jails. And he decided to retire from the sheriff's office in Los Angeles around 2013 when, of course, Baca and Tanaka were being indicted. Now, Bob Norris also is on 100% disability from Los Angeles County from workplace injuries. And he claimed that it was a shoulder injury, 12%, 13%. He had a combined 25% injury. But we were able to obtain records that were publicly sourced, and he had a heart incident back in around 2003, and he had some other injuries. But last I checked through LACERA, Los Angeles County Employment Retirement Association, they settled for his injuries what is his ultimate medical retirement, if you will, his disability. And it's over 50% tax-free because of the disability status. Last year, it was over $190,000. It is what he gets from Los Angeles County every year, and combined medical benefits and his pension. Now you combine that with the $140,000 he makes as sheriff up here, and he makes so much more than his deputies, and they know it. But more importantly, Bob Norris is fraudulent in my belief, because if you worked around anybody that has a disability retirement, you settle with your employer or the state because of a job workplace injury, there are always restrictions on what you can or can't do. I'm a carpenter by trade. If I became disabled and they said, hey, you can no longer swing a hammer, you can't climb a ladder, you can't lift walls or sheetrock or anything like that, those are the restrictions put on me. In the same way, Bob Norris has never provided evidence of what his workplace restrictions are. As sheriff, you are now entering very similar to what you were doing as a deputy, wearing a uniform, wearing your gun belt, performing, as we've seen Bob Norris do, attempt to arrest people publicly. It's very obvious, in my opinion, that he's fraudulent in his disability settlement with the state of California, because he's performing many of the same duties up here that he was when he was down at Los Angeles. So anyway, that's just part of my initial beefs with Bob Norris, but it got a lot deeper as the campaign went on, as the year continued to roll out, when deputies and other public officials would come to me and say, hey, you need to look at this, and I would provide the receipts. I continued to dig
Deputies would come to you.
Yeah, in fact, I have 2 deputies in his department that are moles for me. And there were times where I was finding out information faster than Bob Norris knew himself. He doesn't know who these are, he never will.
How many people work there?
There's 300 between sworn deputies and support staff. But, so anyway, it was, people were very upset working under his administration, which is either you align with Bob and you're part of his club, or you're not, and there is no real leadership. The whole department has suffered for years because of his lack of leadership. The jail is still down at least 20 deputies. They are one incident away in that jail from a consent decree from the Department of Justice coming in and running the jail because of the overcrowding and some of the dangers that have taken place. There's been deaths. I mean, recently I think you saw that there was, 6 inmates that got a hold of fentanyl while they were inside and overdosed. Shit. So, there's problems with dispatch at 911. Bob Norris had to go before the county commissioners to try to get retention bonuses for the 911 operators of about $112,000. I believe they receive $30,000 to $40,000 per 911 operator because he couldn't solve these problems. And so when you look at Bob Norris's legacy for the first 4 years, he accomplished virtually nothing. He was able to get some pay raises for the deputies, which is a good thing, that is a moral thing, but he grew his budget from over 30 million to this year over 50 million. And there's never been a forensic audit of the sheriff's office from top to bottom. As a businessman, 26 years, I understand how important it is that you bring experts in to figure out where all the money is going. You have all your different departments, your different captains and lieutenants, they're all submitting their budget requests and no accountability. The taxpayers deserve to know when they're going before the county commissioners, they being the sheriff's office under Bob Norris, and saying, hey, we need this amount for our operations. Well, prove it. What have you done to show that you've cut waste, that you've gotten rid of dead programs, and that you're accurately allocating money to the best of the county, which is ultimately why the sheriff's office exists, is to provide services to keep the peace and to provide law and order.
Dude. Well, especially if you look at also the federal government and the waste they have.
Yeah.
If it's happening at the top, it's
Yes.
definitely happening at the
Yeah.
bottom. Tell me about Candlelight.
Candlelight. Well, you know, my experience with Candlelight started back in January 24. Running as sheriff, I reached out to many local leaders to introduce myself and to tell them my mission. And I didn't have a direct contact with Paul Van Noy, senior pastor there at Candlelight. What I ended up doing was sending an email to an address that I wasn't 100% certain was his, but it was very simple. I said, hey, Dan Wilson running for sheriff. I'd like to the opportunity to get together with you and to talk with you and share with you why I'm running. Here's a link to my website to give you a little more info on me. Let me know how I can get together with you. That went out the end of January 24, and until October of 24, I never heard one word from him. I would be at town halls or meet and greets, and his congregants would come up to me and say, hey, Pastor Paul has to meet you. Does he know you? Have you reached out to him? Because you are so closely aligned with the things that he talks about and promotes. And I would tell them, yes, I'd sent an email. They would come back and say, well, he says he never got your email. So I would send them my original email, you know, as proof, and then it became, well, he said you were vague. And as we found out later on, because one of our supporters was so concerned why he was avoiding talking to me, not on my own, because I never sent anybody, I never asked for his endorsement, but they went to speak with him, and he agreed to meet with them. This was a young woman in his congregation that he said, I will meet with you, but I want to bring a legal expert to speak with you. Now imagine you want to go to speak with your pastor, and he says, well, we're not going to have a conversation like you and I are having right here. I need to bring an expert in to be able to, I guess, buffer the questions or be able to answer on my behalf any questions. And it's weird. So this congregant said, this is weird, and decided to record the meeting. And this was around August of 24. Again, I hadn't talked with Paul, but the meeting did not go very well. We were eventually provided the audio. I listened to it, didn't have a lot of time to dig real deep into it. Again, I couldn't care less because as a man, you know this, I'm not going to beg somebody to meet with me. That's not what we do as men.
No.
And obviously he had whatever his reasons were. But when I finally listened to it and realized how bad it was in the things that he was saying to slander me, to misrepresent me, to provide gossip, but he also brought in as his legal advocate a former Homeland Security special agent that specialized in human trafficking for over 15 years. So his legal expert that he brings in is this female former Homeland Security human trafficking agent to interject herself into this meeting. And eventually we decided not to release it before the election because I did not want to cause that much of a rift with people, right? I figured we would deal with it later, but I knew what kind of guy he was. Now, he did not know that this was recorded. He didn't know that I had a recording of it, but he eventually sent me an email hundreds of days later, and in his email, he wanted to chew me out and to chastise me and put me in my place and gaslight me. And he told me in the email that he was offended when he got my email because I didn't do enough to get his attention. This is the senior pastor of Candlelight. So, whatever, I blew it off. I didn't respond back. That doesn't deserve a response from me. And he sent me one more when he was upset with a conversation I had released with Pastor Tim Remington and John Padula over at the altar in Coeur d'Alene. So after the campaign was done, about a week later, Paul gets on stage speaking at one of his either Sunday morning service, I believe it was, might have been a Wednesday night, and he mentions that the candidate that was running for sheriff had threatened him. And I'm listening to this with my wife Dawna, and I'm going, I've never talked to the guy. How could I threaten him? And it's just a lie. And I was really, at this point, becoming extremely perturbed because here you have a man of God that's supposed to have wisdom, that's supposed to have, shepherd-like skills, gaslighting me in emails, lying about me, attempting to reach out to him. And so after the election was over, a couple months later, we released the audio. We didn't release audio, we released transcripts, still protecting our source. But fast forward to later this summer, there was the mayoral race in Coeur d'Alene with Dan Gukin. And Dan Gukin was one of 4 candidates. Was at that time a sitting Coeur d'Alene's city councilman, was running for mayor against Woody McEvers, John Pulsifer, and I forget the female's name. Charlene. No, not Charlene. Debbie, right?
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, I apologize, I forget her name. That was the KCRCC, Coonie County Republican Central Committee's choice for mayor. But Paul and Candlelight Church split from the KCRCC. Normally, they are aligned. A lot of the same people that go to Candlelight are also part of the Coonie County Republican Central Committee. And so there was this rift that went through because how dare Paul promote Dan Gukin for mayor over the Coonie County Republicans' choice. And as this unfolded, and we stayed out of it, we interviewed all 4 candidates. I refused to endorse anybody. I noticed patterns developing that Candlelight operatives were employing against others that were not for their candidate. Gaslighting, lying, fabricating, misrepresentation. And I finally said, hell no. I've already seen this. I was a recipient of many of these operatives. And so I decided to release all of the audio and to break it down of that meeting where the parishioner met with Paul and the former federal agent. And that caused a lot of shitstorm because people were upset. How dare you release this? Well, it's legal in the state of Idaho, one-party consent. And people need to understand Paul in his own words, talking about what a great deal he is, how he's close with Sheriff Norris. He asks Sheriff Norris to go do things for him, like go check out a suspicious a tour bus at a local grocery store or Walmart, and he wanted him to go down there and check the legal status of these people, and he claims that Bob Norris does anything he asks and that he's his pastor. And I listened to all this stuff that was sickening, and people were getting pissed off. What I didn't realize next was the thing that blew all of this up. And in late November, several weeks after I had released the audio, Paul Van Noy's daughter, Danielle, who lived in New York, heard my broadcast with Dawna. And in the audio, Paul had stated that ministry was so hard on him and his family. In fact, he had a daughter who had renounced her faith and moved to New York. And that was a catalyst for his very own daughter, who was living and is living in New York, to come back and say, I'm going to set the record straight. And out of the blue, never met her, don't know what she looks like, nothing about her. They release, her and her husband, Gordon, release this very long post on X. And in this post, she shares a text message that Paul, her father, had sent to her, and admitted in this text that he had allowed her to be assaulted by a man and had done nothing to protect her. And there were several other grievances that had taken place. And we were shocked.
What's her name?
Her name's Danielle. Danielle Vanaway.
She's not married?
She is remarried, and she lives in New York.
But that's how they can find it on X.
They can. Danielle_Van-Noy, Vannoy. And so we were working off of this text to highlight some of the things that Danielle had stated about her father that were, as a senior pastor of a church, pretty egregious.
Yeah.
And then operatives came out, those that surround Paul. Paul has a network of operatives that try to do damage control for him. And what they had said was, that's not even really her. Wilson's made this up. They're fabricating all this. But Paul, because he's impulsive, responded and acknowledged that that post was from his daughter and that text message was authentic. And then the floodgates opened up. Not only did we learn more from Danielle publicly stating about her history, but I was given information about law enforcement showing up to Paul's home days later. I put in an immediate records request. I don't think the cop even had time to go back and write his report. That's how fast the information came in. I requested reports and body cam footage and received it. And in the body cam footage that we released around Thanksgiving, you see a Coeur d'Alene patrolman drive up to a residence, and there was two ladies outside near a parked vehicle. The officer gets out and says, "Hey, is Pastor Paul here?" The female says, "No, he's at his office." And then the officer says, "Does Danielle live here?" These are clues. And of course, the female responds and says, "No, she lives in New York or Spain." Then what took place is that we started having victims that had experienced as children sex assaults inside families at Candlelight that were part of staff, associate pastors. And we met with them and verified their stories, and then we began to interview and let the public hear these victims in their own words tell us what had happened to them. And then we were given audio where Paul was recorded bragging to a group of people about his criminal history as a youth, and that he had molested his next door neighbor's daughter.
He was bragging about that.
If you listen to the audio, my belief is there's no remorse, there's no shame. It's, "Hey, I nobody knows. I molested my next door neighbor's daughter. Get over here, let me see it, show it to me, show it to me." I mean, he is disgustingly gleeful in his response. So we began digging in and talking to a lot of people, and from this point we know that there's an active Coeur d'Alene police investigation. Danielle was assaulted in her very own bedroom by a neighbor. The neighbor was 18 years old, broke into her room when she was 13 and assaulted her. Her father knows about this, but rather than turning it into law enforcement the way, and by the way, I've said this, I've gotten heat because how dare a former sheriff candidate, I'd beat the hell out of the dude, right? Yeah, he may not even be living.
Yeah.
And I think every other father understands this. But he decided that the guy could be, rehabilitated, and he didn't want to ruin this 18-year-old's reputation at the expense of his own daughter. And to make matters worse, Danielle lived next door to this sex abuser.
Do you have his name?
Jacob Saldana. Jacob Saldana, according to Coeur d'Alene police, took his life, and the way that came about was, so Danielle lives next door to the guy that assaulted her. Paul then hires this guy to come over and do routine maintenance on their lawn and their sprinkler system and have full access to their house. After all this took place.
Is this like a cult they're running?
I fully believe that Candlelight, in its many different faces is a cult. So eventually Danielle moves away. Jacob Saldana, her abuser, which Paul acknowledges in his response on Facebook, went on to not only attend Candlelight, but eventually assaulted another member. And I have a police report where it looks like he was sexually assaulting and got caught one of his family members. But our understanding is Jacob Saldana, before he was going to go to trial, killed himself. So he's no longer here.
How long ago was that?
2-3 years ago. So you have all these things going on. The witness that we interviewed, her father was an associate pastor at Candlelight back in the 90s, friends with Paul's. And this stepfather was molesting the victim, his stepdaughter. People knew about it. He had a fetish, and I won't, because I don't know who's listening, I won't get too graphic, but he had a problem with undergarments and was caught, and then admitted that the demons inside his head were telling him to do things and to be attracted to his stepdaughter. And rather than remove him from staff, from being the associate music pastor, they kept him on staff. They did nothing to help his stepdaughter, the victim.
How old?
She was in her teens. And she went on to be abused. And there was no concern whatsoever for the victims. Once again, it was a cover-up, and we have to allow this guy that had admitted to Paul and the elders that he had demons inside of his head telling him to assault his stepdaughter is kept on staff. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And so,
Especially for a fucking leader of a church.
yeah.
And you're supposed to be a leader in our community. It's fucking disgusting.
John chapter 10 talks about the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. But an imposter, a hired shepherd, when he sees the danger, when he sees the bear or the lion or the thief, runs away because he's just a hired hand. But the good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. And you know, when you look at a pastor that's supposed to be a shepherd, in fact, we just found some audio yesterday of Paul in his own words stating, "It's my job to protect the sheep here underneath me. I am the shepherd. It's my job to protect them," unless they happen to be sex assault victims. In the 90s, or early 2000s rather, he hired a convicted, registered level 3 sex offender who had committed his crime against children down in California. Move up. Paul gave him a job here in Idaho. He was on staff at Candlelight. Nobody knew that he was this registered sex offender, or the congregation did not know. And he was allowed to roam for years, not only assisting with services and other programs, but wandering all around the church. And in fact, a woman from the congregation ended up marrying him, but it was never disclosed to her that he had this sex offense background. He was a registered sex offender. And when she found out that her marriage was based on fraud, she wanted a divorce, and Paul did not want to allow her to get divorced. He asked for staffers who had no experience in any kind of counseling or training to counsel her that biblically she needed to stay with her husband and not get divorced. You know, there was another audio that we released of Paul bragging that there was a man in the congregation that nobody knew, that was in an adult bookstore doing things sexually he should not be doing, was arrested, was a registered sex offender, and allowed to run around the church. There are over 4 other instances that we have not yet released of sex offenders running around in that church. One, to include abusing a relative before he killed himself. So this church is full of rot.
How are you getting this audio?
People that have taken the audio themselves and they have given it to us. They've held on to it. For so long, Paul, in 30 years, has been allowed to operate with zero accountability, surrounding himself by shysters like Steve Cooney, and Steve Cooney's past as a swindler, con man. And because the community refuses, if it's not my church, we're not going to say anything, these victims have no voice. Nobody's going to believe them. You have a powerful man, by his own count. I'm a pretty big deal here in Cooney County. If you want to get elected, you have to come to me first before anybody else. You have to buy me a steak dinner. You can understand how, if you are a child whose father was abusing you and they're going to cover it up, what recourse do you have? You know, when you have a woman who worked as a personal assistant for 10 years, and then her husband dies, and she gives over $20,000 of her life insurance, her husband's life insurance, to the church to tithe, right? We were talking about this earlier about tithing, including 10% of her salary, and 2 weeks later is fired without any explanation. And upon leaving, when she can't make the payments for her house, and she goes back and says, Paul, I'm a widow now, you fired me, I have no income, I need that money back. And he refuses to give this money back, and she ends up being homeless, loses her home, and is homeless for 3 years living in a motorhome. Paul has made a lot of enemies by people that he has abused and has refused to help. But if they have money, he's quick to be their friend.
Like that.
And to bring on elders and people that will, you know, support him financially and morally. But, you know, we even captured not too long ago, they were big into this Charlie Kirk Faith Hub, TP USA Faith Hub that they just started a chapter here in Cooney County. And at one of their gatherings, you have another registered sex offender that is there between the youth pastor and all the kids. Nobody is at all paying attention to what's going on at Candlelight. And so that was a very long explanation, and probably not as far as you maybe wanted to go, but it's a very complex situation. And if Paul Van Noy is not held accountable, then this county's doomed, because nobody else in this county will be. And I believe that most of the churches today are businesses masquerading as churches, and that's my personal belief.
100%. Damn.
Kind of leave you speechless after that.
Yeah.
And I had no, 3 months ago, I had no idea that this was going to be dropped in our lap, but people saw our commitment to calling out. I have no problem. I've been a follower of Jesus Christ and believed in him for 46 years. I read the word daily. My relationship with Christ is solid. I've read scripture, and I realize that it's important to call. It doesn't matter what their status is. God is no respecter of any one person. And I have zero problems when I see something wrong calling it out. I can't not call it out.
That's biblical.
And people are really upset about that. How dare you go after God's chosen and it's not up to you? Now, you guys don't read your Bibles. but people saw this, and I believe that, the Lord put us into a position to say, look, Wilson has no ties with any local churches. He has no friends to worry about severing relationships with. We are given the freedom to be able to be completely transparent, but completely bold and honest in calling it out, saying, this is wrong. I mean, Paul came out after Danielle posted her very first post, and his first Sunday sermon was about thorns in the flesh and how children can be a thorn in the flesh. And he called his daughter a thorn in his flesh.
Like she's a liar.
Yeah, like she's a problem. So what do you do with that? You look at things going on politically with the so-called conservative Republicans that are trying to legislate their morality for all the state of Idaho. You have 100+ evangelical churches in Kootenai County, mega churches, and you say, this county should be transformed if all these pastors, all these shepherds were truly preaching the word and being effective in the gospel of Jesus Christ. This county would be transformed. And yet we see a county that, we may be more conservative than Spokane. We may all be patriots and MAGA and, pro-gun and pro-constitution, but socially we're every bit as rotten as our liberal neighbors to the west of us in Spokane.
crazy. So what you're saying is with the sex trafficking is it's within the own church and they're using their own children.
That is the conclusion we're coming to because, of course, in between there, we also started talking about the altar and the altar church and their recovery program, the ranch.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing again.
Wait, they're doing the same shit.
Well, they're doing similar things. You have deviants that are pastors that are in charge, and of course you have success. There are success stories because it's court mandated, deferment of sentence, right? You go through rehab, you spend $3,500, and by the way, you have Tim Remington, the pastor, who started Good Samaritan Ministries that runs the ranch for men and women, and he owns all these properties, multi-million-dollar properties above Wolf Lodge, and he leases those properties to Good Samaritan, who pays for the properties. But you have people that are going through these programs, they're still doing things they're not supposed to be doing, and you have guys like Remington who will have women come over and clean his house from the ranch and then say, well, if you don't want to work, you can get out of it by rubbing my feet, rubbing my back, or some other extremely weird, out of bounds, touchy-feely things that shouldn't be going on. And you go, okay, well, why would we believe addicts? And you think about it, you take the most vulnerable, the people that are, strung out or have records, and you can cover things up because nobody's going to believe those people. Now, I'm not saying that you just believe everything everybody says. Of course, there's a process. But again, somebody that we didn't know recorded a conversation an hour long with Tim Remington. And in that church, they had 2 sex assaults, one a rape, and one that was pled down to a molestation because it was too hard to substantiate for the prosecutors an actual rape of an 11-year-old girl.
Who was it?
Who is the girl?
No, who was the dude?
So the first dude, we'll talk about the rape of the 15-year-old. Dude that had gone through the program, had graduated, was visiting his mother who was going through the program. And while he was up there visiting, they had a young 15-year-old girl that was also having problems, and they somehow were able to get guardianship of her, and she was going through the program with the adult women. And soon the son and the 15-year-old started up a romantic relationship, and he was in his almost 30s, he was in his 20s, she was 15, and he was statutorily raping her.
What's his name?
Oh, I want to say his name was Josh. I don't recall his name. I can get that for you.
Is he local?
He was, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Really?
And then you have Tommy and Darren. I'm getting real bad on names tonight. They were in the spokes. All these were in the Coeur d'Alene Press, by the way. This isn't just me spouting off. But you had another couple that had previously been convicted of sexually assaulting a minor. I think it was rape. They did part of their sentence, a couple, so 2 of them. He was then allowed to be security and work after he was, out of lockup. Was allowed to run around the church, and he was acting as security. While he's there working as security in his official capacity at the altar church, this little 11-year-old girl comes in. These parents were going through the extended program, so they were no longer, my understanding, actually living for the 90 days up at the ranch, but they were going through the heavy discipleship and other, part of the more extensive program there at the church. And she came to look for her parents one day, and this Darren, who had already been convicted of this other sex assault, befriended this little girl, said, hey, I got kids your age, and they happen to go to the same school as this little girl, and invite her over to the house, be her friend, and he was then raping her and violating her there. And he was caught and is serving another, prison sentence over that. But this is the crap that's going on, and in this undercover audio, by somebody we had never met prior to them, hearing us with all the other exposés going on, shared with us, and we met with this lady and heard more of her story. But you have literally Tim Remington, pastor, justifying the 28-year-old that was raping the 15-year-old because, she was kind of, instigating it. Right? And by the way,
That's what he says on the audio.
Yes. And we have that. It's already on our YouTube page from several weeks ago. And then, he's also talking about women in their Jezebel spirit. I am fed up of pastors using this Jezebel spirit to defame and to put down, diminish women that are victims. Men, if we are followers of Christ, there is zero excuse. It doesn't matter what the woman does.
Yeah.
My boys are raised, they do not take advantage of anything because of the actions of another. They understand where the moral line is, the biblical line. But they call them a Jezebel spirit because then it makes them sound like prostitutes. And we've learned from human trafficking, prostitutes now are considered human trafficking victims. Anybody that is doing forced sexual labor are victims.
Yeah.
But you have Tim that is justifying this and, also justifying the fact that he didn't let the congregation know that this Darren and Tommy were previously convicted sex offenders and on a registry. But this is the attitude. And then, of course, when you hear the other stories that will soon be trickling out from former residents, if you tell, you're going to get violated, go back to jail, so keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
And you have John Padula right now, who's running once again for county commissioner, who was 15 years ago, by his own admission, a notorious felon in Kootenai County, drug runner, all sorts of crime. Found Jesus, was saved, great on him. But he also runs recovery out of his house. And there are other things that are going on. But these people, and he bragged on a podcast that he had vetted over 1,000 women. Well, how many of those were underage, right? There are things that are going on in this community when it comes to churches and the Republican Party that if we don't purge them, we will suffer the consequences for it. You can't claim that you're conservative and that you're followers of Christ. And by the way, just because you say you're conservative doesn't mean you're a follower of Christ.
No, yeah.
And people have a hard time of understanding that your government is not your faith. We're a post-Christian nation. But your faith should help you in your politics. I mean, it should be a reflection of who you are.
Oh, of course.
But if you can't clean this up, there is no hope.
Yeah. No, I completely
And
agree.
then, by the way, you also have the KCRCC, who has their rated and vetting program for candidates, and that's when I decided to jump ship and become an independent. In this last primary in May of 25, they ran Angelo Brunson from Angelo's restaurant here in Coeur d'Alene.
Yeah.
And Angelo, I obtained body-worn camera from Coeur d'Alene Police. He was one of the rated and vetted candidates. And he made voluntary statements to Coeur d'Alene Police. Coeur d'Alene Police was investigating 5 Asian massage parlors owned by the same entity for human trafficking. Here in Coeur d'Alene. They eventually shut them down, not because of human trafficking, that the prosecuting attorney didn't believe they had enough to be able to get convictions, but they shut them down for fraudulent licensing issues. But Angelo was stopped coming out of one of these massage parlors, and he opened up his mouth. He was stopped for a traffic violation, and again, we played this full 13-minute audio and visual from the body-worn camera, but you have Angelo bragging that he was going to these massage parlors because of his bad back and that they often touched his genitals, and he told no, he wasn't into that, and that there were young girls working there about 14 years of age, and he would tip them very well. And we even have evidence of him in 2020 calling law enforcement to say, hey, these 5 different Asian massage parlors are doing some bad things, and you guys should be paying attention. And then he continues to frequent them. And he's making all these voluntary statements to the public that he is frequenting them several times a month, and he knows that they're attempting to touch his genitals and do things that are illegal. And then he concludes by stating that he was going to have to go to confession after this because he knows that he shouldn't be going to these places. But the KCRCC, when we blew this story and played it in his own words, nothing that we doctored, the KCRCC, the so-called conservative group that are MAGA and want to, make certain that this is a very godly Christian county, refused to pull their endorsement of Angelo, despite all the evidence. So we have a problem in Cooney County with people that take advantage of children and churches and political organizations standing up and refusing to do anything. And one of my largest campaign topics was that of human trafficking. I believe that we do not do enough in this county to go after human trafficking of all sorts. And Bob Norris, prior to me running, one of the reasons that I decided to run is because he continually publicly stated, and he still states it, that human trafficking is not taking place here in Cooney County. But Nate Lewis from The Innocent, an organization that is committed to eradicating human trafficking from our cities, that equips law enforcement with special techniques and resources to conduct their stings and to recognize it, he'll tell you otherwise. He knows what's going on in this county. So you have a sheriff who denies human trafficking is going on, even though he knows better. 30 years Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. I retired from Spokane County area law enforcement in 23. I was dealing with human trafficking over there. It doesn't stop at the border. You have major casinos, I-90, 395, 195, 95. A former Homeland Security special agent specializing in human trafficking that is a close personal advisor of Pastor Paul Van Noy and Bob Norris.
What?
You would think that, I was a cop. You start looking at signs and going, something ain't right here. But you have this Homeland Security, and her husband is a former Border and Customs pilot, helicopter pilot, that is flying Bob Norris's volunteer helicopter program with the county, the pay-to-play that we've talked about previously. And you start you come back at a 30,000 view and go, what the hell's going on here?
Yeah.
What is really going on? You have Pastor Paul saying, Bob Norris is a good friend of mine. Whatever I ask him to do, he does. And he's my pastor. You have the Homeland Security agent that is former, allegedly. Maybe they're still on the payroll as a contractor. I don't know. Seems very odd to me that this person is embedded and isn't going, Bob, what the hell are you talking about? Human trafficking is at industrial scale across the whole United States. And yet, this individual is running very close to the epicenters of where these sex abuse issues are taking place. Victory originally was more outreach to, former felons and convicts and things like that to be more of a ministry, because they go all the way back, man, to the 90s. I remember when they were meeting in a very small Grange out of a Park Road in Spokane Valley before they got big. And so I do believe that there are places where other men can come in and say, okay, we're going to teach you the Word of God, and we're going to have our accountability groups. But guess what? As much as I understand that this is from your past, we can't take those chances. It's more important that the sheep are safe.
And somebody's fucking feelings.
And sorry, but that you are safe, but there are consequences, and part of the consequences are you're not allowed to go and commingle with, young family married. And so I think that one of my, I homeschooled all 5 of my children, and it was a struggle because I was considered to be the strict dad. I didn't do sleepovers. I didn't let people sleep over at our place. And I continually monitored where my kids were going because I understood, not only because of my part-time profession, but also my own personal experience at how fast these things take place. And it always comes from the people that we think you least expect it from. The worst predators are the people that we know that are masquerading. And so I just said I'm never going to, as far as it's within my capacity, I'm never going to allow my kids until they're old enough to fight for themselves, get put into a position where they can be violated. I just wasn't willing. And looking back now, my sons, and even my daughter with my grandson says, oh, now I get it. I get why you're that way, but I realize that some of the biggest chameleons are inside churches masquerading. They're wolves.
Where you should be the safest.
Yes. Yeah.
How many times have people tried to sue you?
No.
Really?
And I think the reason they don't try to sue me is because they understand that discovery's a bitch. And if I say something, I have stuff to back it up. I've been threatened.
Well, yeah, if you're going after all these powerful people.
And it probably eventually will. But I truly believe that the message, and people don't realize how much time I spend into getting my facts and my folders and files together. And I have advisors. So, a lot of the things that people didn't realize when I was running for sheriff, and we tried to get the message out, but there's a certain cult. To be a sheriff, you don't have to be law enforcement to be a sheriff in the state of Idaho. It's an elected position. Under sheriffs run the entire department. They're the ones that have a 20, 30-year career. The sheriff is the one that represents the people. And so you had a lot of superior elitists, law enforcement go, hell, we don't want some guy that, did spend 20 years doing this full time to be our boss. Yeah. Instead of looking at going, well, maybe somebody that has been in business for all these years successfully and run crews and hired and fired and also did the job for 12 years. I had the exact same commission as far as the requirements of our written test as a full-time deputy or police officer had. And so what they didn't realize is that my undersheriff, my choice, who still is to this day, we've never revealed, is inside Cooney County Sheriff's Office. Well beloved by the men and women of the entire department. A solid guy, would have been an awesome undersheriff, would have helped right the wrongs, and we were going to change the entire leadership model inside. But what people fail to understand is that a career businessman like myself that's been in all these sectors, the reason I got there, coming from building a home in Cooney County as a brand new apprentice back in the 90s to running these successful companies with, as you said, contracts with the Department of Defense and major medical. It's because I understood how to surround myself with subject matter experts, men that were way more brilliant than me. Yeah. And you bring these men together, and that's why I was going to run the Cooney County Sheriff's Office. Yeah. You cast that vision, and you bring your captains and your lieutenants in to execute that mission. But I'm a huge fan of Jocko Willink.
Yeah, so am I.
And at our organization, if you come to work for me, you have to go through extreme ownership. Yep. And we run our people through the Echelon Front Academy.
No shit.
So we pay for our guys. In fact, we had a couple yesterday that were on his weekly live Zoom call where you can talk with Jocko and the team, and it's on leadership, extreme ownership.
I've read Extreme Ownership, The Dichotomy of Leadership. Yep. I'm very familiar with Jocko Willink.
My boys read it. I give it to my daughter's boyfriend. I believe in that kind of leadership. But, in order to eradicate things from our community, if we as men don't step up to the plate and become more concerned about what's going on in our own backyard and community rather than what sports team is going to the championships this year and, my lake house and my camping trips and my hunting trips, right? Because we're in Idaho and everybody hunts. Those things are great, and I miss those. I don't have much time for them anymore, but it's imperative that if we don't stand up as Christians and start doing the right thing and being bold and courageous and reading our word and getting our authority from the Word of God, as well as Americans, if we don't go back to the founders and read what those brilliant men had to say themselves about our government. If we just say, well, I'm pro-Constitution, but you don't understand the framework of how did they come to write this Constitution? How did the Bill of Rights come? What preceded that with the Mayflower Compact and this great history of the United States and the philosophers of John Locke and Plato and Aristotle and if you don't read these greats and understand the human condition of men, you can't be a good leader in your own community to stand up for the Constitution and Bill of Rights. It's slipping away from us because we're allowing con men to represent us and run our communities. And the most important community, you know, I think of Federalist 85 that was written by Hamilton. He says, we can rest securely in the disposition of the state legislators to erect a barrier against the national government, meaning that the founders fully intended for local governments to throw checks and balances and stack to the federal government. It's this whole accountable but autonomous, right?
Yeah.
We run our own households, but you can't just rubber stamp carte blanche because the federal government does something. We saw this in January 6th. We're seeing it in many other things that are playing out.
Well,
but,
yeah, it was the FBI.
yeah, and the FBI has a history. Governor Whitmer and the kidnapping and bombing plot. You know, Ruby Ridge, Waco. If you go back to Ruby Ridge, setting up a Randy Weaver because he would be an informant for them. But, you know, so you have a lot of guys that come up here, especially in Idaho, because Idaho is, in my opinion, the most free state in the union, even surpasses Texas, in my personal opinion. But the guys come up here, well, you know, I'm around with a bunch of guys wearing Wranglers, driving jacked up trucks, you know, and we're pro-Second Amendment. And they think that, okay, that's all I need to do. No, you have to be vigilant. You have to actually understand how your government works, what the restrictions are, and what the government is mandated by the Constitution to do as to protect our rights. John Locke said, the English philosopher that predated the founders by over 100 years, coined the phrase, the laws of nature and nature's God. You know, that we find in our Declaration of Independence. Supreme being, creator, put everything into place. We watch it through the natural world. We understand that every man is created equal in the image of God, same worth, not same talents.
Yeah.
And every person has the right to life, liberty, and property, or the pursuit of happiness. And so you can't come about deciding that I'm going to be a conservative because I'm pro-gun and go, okay, well, what does that mean? I'm pro-Second Amendment. Okay, cool. Well, are you equally pro-First Amendment? The right to free speech. Government shall make no laws establishing religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The rights of the people to assemble and to petition their government. You know, these are the things that allow us the horsepower in this country to be able to have these unalienable rights. And so we have a lot of young guys today and grown-ass men that are conservative because they're Republican, but they don't even really understand what it means. And so they're easily lulled into these false arguments of saying, you either stand for liberty or you don't. It doesn't matter if you're a liberal or a Democrat or a Republican or independent. The same rules apply across the board, and you have to remain true to it regardless.
So what I see, I don't think, especially at federal level in the government, like Republicans and Democrats, it doesn't fucking matter because they're all on the same team.
I agree.
And against the people, and they just take turns of taking all the heat.
I agree.
It's so glaringly obvious, especially when Biden got like Biden didn't win that fucking election. There's no fucking way he won that election.
I agree. I think there's more than enough evidence provided that there has been, especially in 2020, throwing elections for many years. And I don't think we have any idea as to how deep it goes because it's here.
I really feel like after watching how much, because I've always been a Trump guy, but watching how much Trump is owned by Israel, it really shows like maybe this was all just, they wanted you to be like, oh, they stole the election. They wanted you to feel this way, to get pissed off, for him to get back in office. And then what's he do?
Yeah.
Nothing he said he was going to do with like the Epstein files and then Kash Patel and Dan Bongino. They were so fucking hot. Like day one, they're coming out.
Down.
Like, and then where the fuck are they? And then now you can just tell when Kash Patel, I don't know what podcast he was on, but it was after he had already gotten that position, and he just gave him this politician's answer of why he hasn't released them. And it's so obvious. I mean, it doesn't fucking matter who goes in there. They like own every single person.
It's been an interesting year for me to start expanding even, and I've always been thoughtful and paid attention. I agree with you. I believe that the parties now are nothing more than a uniparty, and they all decide, okay, you play this side for this time, we'll play this side. You know, I differ because I have friends, and people are in various stages of realization.
Sure.
So because somebody doesn't agree with me doesn't mean that I'm their enemy, nor that they have to be mine, or you know, that I'm theirs. We all uncover these truths as we do our own research and have an open mind. Congress is completely compromised. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I think the thing that concerned me is that 4 years under Biden, the sky was falling, and it was horrible. If you don't get the vaccine, you don't get medical care, you're not going to go to, you know, you can't work. I mean, you think about all the tyranny that took place during COVID.
Yeah.
And then you have all these people that saw the immigration, and it's not even immigration, the invasion of our country, tens of millions into this country, and the trillions of dollars being printed.
You know why they were doing it.
Which part?
All the aliens coming in. Because they're going to take over the voting system.
Yeah.
And with all these people, oh, well, if I vote Democrat, I get all this free shit.
But I think it's multi-layered. I think that's part of it. But also, Dawna and I, in January 24, I'm friends with Mark Lamb, who's the former sheriff of Pinal County. He used to go by the American Sheriff. I went down because he's down there in southern, you know, outside of Phoenix, and I wanted him to take me to the border. I want to see firsthand the unsecure Arizona border. So Don and I went with his son Cade, who's former 82nd Airborne, and we spent 14 hours down on the border, and we saw firsthand. We walked into the NGO camps of No Mas Muertes, No More Death, where hundreds, and I mean hundreds, we videoed it, hundreds of military-aged males from Africa and the Middle East were pouring across the border.
Well, and from China.
We, at the time, didn't see anybody from China, but yes, all of these.
Yeah.
And these were men that did not want us there. I recognized as a man that has been in law enforcement, I understand what a fighting mindset male is. And these were definitely enemy combatants, if you will. I mean, I don't know if that's the correct phrase, but I'll use it for this conversation. So yes, I think that you have what they call poly-stabs, poly-stability groups. So you have these different pockets of these military-aged males embedded throughout the entire country. And when the time is right, they will be activated to cause mass amounts of chaos. So between the voting and the breaking of the system and our social systems, we've got a real mess. And that's why my message originally was for Cooney County to get ready. We could have been the model for all counties to see what a united people look like. And it's not just, well, you're a Republican, so you're on my team. I wanted to have a citizens posse. And I was attacked because people said, well, you're going to arm all these guys and run around vigilantes like a militia. I'm like, absolutely not. We were going to employ people after background checks. There were operators, meaning heavy equipment operators, and engineers, and accountants, and people that are loggers, and, you know, every kind of expertise you could think of, because in the event of a man-made or natural disaster, like we saw in the Carolinas with the hurricane, nobody's coming except us. And I don't care if you're a far leftist. If you have a skill set that can secure our county, that's what I was attempting to employ once I became sheriff.
Sure.
Because I wanted this county to be ready for any kind of a situation to triage ourselves. If we can't secure ourselves at a local level, you're not going to do it at a state or federal, because guess what? When the shit hits the fan, the feds ain't coming, the state sure as heck isn't coming. You only have our neighbors.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's like, if you can't take care of yourself, how the fuck are you going to take care of other people? Let me ask you this. Okay, so why are you going to run for office?
2 reasons. One, I have no desire to go through that process again.
Yeah.
I have never been a politician. I'm what I thought was a statesman. I don't think statesmen can be elected anymore. And number two, I think that I'm far more effective and what I'm doing now for however long we decide to do it. Dawna and I have said, one day we may just disappear.
Yeah.
We rebranded because we continued these daily or weekly live streams that I did. There were town halls during the campaign for people to ask me questions and to talk about what was going on. And we still had a lot of people that were interested. I mean, just because I wasn't elected as sheriff does not mean that the same issues just went away. So we felt compelled to continue this fight and to try to bring people back into an idea of fight for your local community, fight for what's right, but also embed yourself in our theme during the election. And we came to this phase. I was on a national podcast, and I was talking about, we need men and women who are committed to liberty without compromise. And I was like, that is really our message. We want people in this community to go back to the beginning and truly read for themselves what the founders had to say and understand our history of our country. Because when you are solid in the foundations of what this country was founded on, what the founders had to say, you're not easily conned anymore by politicians, by religious groups. Because I've now witnessed personally Republicans and so-called Christians, or people who call themselves people of faith, are every bit the propagandists that they claim that the far left is. Now, different ideologies, yes, but they all have problems telling the truth and to truly stand for beliefs. The problem today is you have Christians who believe that the United States government is an extension of their church. When the founders founded the country in the 1700s, it was predominantly Europeans that had a common belief, Catholicism, Christianity, the Anglican Church, the Church of England. So that was their kind of basic background. They had similarities. It wasn't 100% the same from a theological standpoint, but you didn't have Buddhists here, you didn't have Muslims. So they based the Constitution off of Christian principles, but it didn't mean that they said that this is a Christian government. In fact, Madison, the architect of the Constitution, continually espoused the importance of personal belief not done at the barrel of a gun by the government. Your belief in your creator is your own business. Government cannot compel you to a belief. And so this idea of the First Amendment coming in to Congress shall make no laws establishing a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Notice that it didn't say that government can't talk about religion, that government can't have prayer, but it has to be volunteer, it can't be at the barrel of a gun. And last year in Idaho's 2025 legislative session, we had Representative Jordan Redmond that attempted to introduce a bill that would require public schools throughout the entire state to read the Bible every single day. I'm a believer. I love the Word of God. But government can't force others into that belief because, kind of like Paul Manoy when he was pissed off when the city of Coeur d'Alene finally said, look, you can't just hog the prayers before the city council. We have to allow other faiths in there. You have this same argument, which is we are a post-Christian nation. Our nation is no longer, when the founders found it, predominantly Christian Europeans, similar values, formed the government. Washington and Madison and others made similar comments. This is a government wholly for a righteous and moral people because Christians and people of the Christian faith are more apt to be self-governed because of our beliefs in the Word of God and our demands, not to diminish others, but they understood that once you lost morality and the authority of the churches to keep their people a virtuous people, then eventually you're going to lose it because the Constitution now protects all these other ideologies that you don't believe in. And it protects the atheists, it protects the Buddhists and the Muslims. And people get really, really spun up about it, but they forget, if you want to change the government, you don't go and do it at the barrel of a gun and force your morality, your Christianity on the mass. No, what happens is if the churches are functioning properly, they transform people's hearts and minds through the Holy Spirit, and then a reflection of that is reflected in the government.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of part of this problem that we were talking about is that if you think that we're going to go and force somebody to read the Bible, you might as well spit in the wind.
Yeah, right. Like you have to, like God says, when you search for me with all your heart, you will find me. And if you're telling people like to go do it, they're not going to find God. They don't give a shit, you know? You have to go on that journey yourself.
And constitutionally, if you allow the Bible to be read, then you have to allow Islam, you have to allow Buddhism, you have to allow the Church of Satan. So we're better off at this time in our history, even though 100 years ago it was very common to have more biblical resources used by public institutions. You're better off right now in the state that we're in to say, government, completely, we are not going to enter into the religion business. But by God, I hope that good men and women who do serve the true God will get involved and change their communities, because, you know, when Charlie Kirk was killed and everybody said, oh, we got revival coming. When you study American history and you look at our great revivals that took place in the 1800s and late 1700s, it was started by men that were broken because of their sin and began mass repentance, corporate repentance. And as a result of these corporate repentances, then you start to see the revival. So to come and say, well, you know, we're going to gather the Jews and the Christians and the Catholics and, you know, the Hindus and the secularists and anybody of faith and have these faith hubs, and we're going to promote this revival, that's not biblical. It's not reality. It's not historically correct. If we really want to transform this country and get out of the problem of Congress and the presidency, and at our state level with all the bullshit that's going on there, if you don't acknowledge your sin individually and corporately and repent, there is no revival.
Right.
That's just the facts.
I never thought about that. Yeah, no kidding. I kind of want to switch it up a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was there a point in your life where you realized like nobody was coming to see you? Because I know exactly what day it was for me. Like the exact moment it was.
That nobody's coming to save you.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever had one of those conversion type of stories. I've just had an accumulation of many events. Mm-hmm. I'm different than some people. I grew up in the faith. I grew up with the philosophy that my dad taught me and the code that I live by. But I have, especially the past 10 years, lived some extremely hard years to where when I look back, I realize that God allowed me to go through these extremely sucky times in order to prepare me for the work that I'm doing now.
Absolutely.
How about you?
Yeah. So I know that firsthand, that every bad thing that had ever happened to me was a fucking blessing.
Yeah.
And it made me so much stronger. And the day I knew nobody was coming to save me, I had gotten drunk the night before, just like every other night. And I woke up and I was like, this is what I have to look forward to. Like, this is my life. And I went down, it was in the middle of the winter, I went down to Coeur d'Alene Lake, and I fucking walked straight through the snow into the water. I dunked my head under the water, and I said, Father, forgive me. And shortly after that, I quit drinking, and I went to church March 31st, 2024. It was Easter that year. I don't know why. I just went to church, and I hadn't been in years, and it was like a light switch. I haven't had a drink since that day.
That's awesome.
And then I went and did Idaho, and that was the most important day of my life. Was the day I did Idaho, and I really found God that day through visions I had. We don't have to get into it because it would take a long time.
That's pretty intense.
It's for people who've never done it, it sounds really intense. But when I was going through it, it didn't feel intense. You know, it's hard to describe. And then I'd just been like on this healing journey, and that's when I started. I did Ibogaine. I got off everything from the Ibogaine. Came home, and that's when I started skydiving, and that was incredible because real men of faith have to overcome fear. Yes. Because if they do not, how can you claim to be a man of faith? Yeah. So for me, it was really just overcoming the fear, and it made you feel so free and like you feel so incredible. And then did ayahuasca in Peru. So like the Ibogaine did like 85% of the healing, and the ayahuasca in Peru just shoved it over the top, and that's what gave me the courage to even start motion. Was doing the ayahuasca. I really feel like, and a lot of my beliefs, a lot of people aren't gonna agree with, a lot of Christians, you know, but like when I did Ibogaine, the last visions I had were my hands turned and they were bloody and dirty, and there's holes in the center of my hands. I'm looking at it and I'm like, these are Jesus Christ's hands. And then he had taken like a laser precision cut on my finger, removed this part of my finger, replaced it with his. My whole hand was normal except for this part. And then I hear, no, you and me are one. So I start breaking this down. And I'm like, he gave me a piece of his broken body to make me whole because he is the Father. And it was powerful, dude. It was really powerful. I've just been on this like long healing journey, and it's been incredible, and I'm just enjoying the ride. Like, these plant medicines have done nothing but solidify my faith. And I know I've already gotten a lot of pushback, you know. Yeah. I just feel like if other people would do it, they would also see.
I understand it.
Yeah.
I don't know as much about it. One of the verses that I love is in Proverbs. The crucible for silver and the furnace for gold, and the Lord tests the hearts of men. And I think that sounds very similar to what you're talking about. You know, God is constantly refining us, cleaning us, and putting us through the fire in order to test our hearts.
Yeah, because he refers to himself as a silversmith. There's a story, say, well, when do you know to pull the silver out of the fire? Well, that's easy when I see my reflection in it. And I love that. Like, I love it so much because I didn't understand when I was going through, like, I went through like 3 years where it was really fucking rough. And I didn't understand, you know, like, I was alone, isolated, and it fucking sucked. But it was the most important thing that ever happened to me. It was like all the shitty things I've been through. And I realize now that it's just preparation for what is to come. Yeah. You know, just preparation for what's to come.
And it never ends.
Right.
As long as, you know, I'm way many more moons older than you. In fact, I'm probably closer to my kid's age. But I can tell you that this idea that I had when I was younger, that eventually I'm going to get to a point and it's going to be, you know, okay, a lot easier. It doesn't. I think that's one of the things that keeps us grounded here, constantly searching for eternity. If we as men don't continually go through the lens of our decisions are eternal, right? What we're doing here now is a reflection of what we believe in and what we're ultimately hoping to obtain through our faith and our salvation. I don't want to be showing up, as it's been said, on the doors of heaven and being in nice clothes and looking like I never did a hard day's work. I would much more love to come sliding in sideways with ripped up clothes, scuffed up arms, and broken parts of the body, saying, I did this because I believed in my Savior and I wasn't idle. I didn't just sit on my salvation, that I actively wanted to fight for the things that God says are good. When God says his eyes wander to and fro over the entire earth looking for a righteous man.
Well, and you know you're on the right path when people are laughing at you.
Yeah.
So for you, that had to have been like, that you were doing what you're supposed to do, especially going through the whole campaign and how dirty it got, and like a ton of people came after you
Yeah.
from news organizations, and
Yeah.
it's like, you're doing the right thing.
I think though also, if you have a code, and I encourage, young men, develop your code, what you believe in, and understand it inside out, the things that you will not compromise, and who you are, what is your creed, what is your religious view, right? The things that make you you can't compromise. But you still, even when you go through things, you have to self-reflect, because I may be out of line. The human condition, the heart is deceitful above all things, desperately wicked, who can know it? We talked, I think, in the beginning about the human condition. And so the Lord has a way of humbling us on regular occasions. So I get humbled on a daily basis.
Yeah.
But I've also been blessed by having a wife, a godly wife, who is my closest friend. And I believe that I am able to do what I do right now because of her support.
Sure.
And without her, I would be a highly inefficient man. I'm not going to say that I couldn't still do good, but when God brings in a good wife and you have that support, that helps you with the vision, because she keeps me focused. But she's also quick to be able to say, hey, I think you kind of handled that wrong, or different perspective.
Yeah.
I think that as followers of Christ, we have so many resources at our fingers. We expect it to be easy, instead of saying, okay, God has given me a sound mind. He's given me the Spirit. We're promised the Spirit. Biggest complaint that I have with so-called churches and leadership is like, you guys are supposed to have the Spirit. The Spirit is that great, resource that we have to be able to discern things that we, with our human minds, don't have an idea. That's when we get that small voice that says, this isn't bad. I can't articulate why it's bad, but I gotta to flee from this. We have these resources, but oftentimes it's easy to be like Jonah, or to be like Elijah, or Moses, or any of the great examples we have of the men that got tired and got discouraged to the point where you go, well, maybe it's better off that I'm just dead. Or we've got to keep in mind that we struggle now. It's spiritual, as it talks about, in Ephesians. We don't wrestle. I mean, this is my cup, the shield of faith. It extinguishes the lies of Satan, all the attacks. We have these resources. We just have to be bold enough to say, I'm going to do what God tells me in the still small voice. And if I'm attempting to continually obey Him and do what's right, God has a way of taking my stupidity, the things that I err in, and flipping those around for His good. Even if it comes at, well, this person said something mean about me, or 99% of these people hate my guts. Guess what? I have a Savior who died, who redeemed me, and says you're worth something. That is more than enough.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to meet my Savior one day, and I want to hear those words. Well done, good and faithful servant.
Dude, I think that's a great place to end it. And I mean, we have a lot more we could talk about, so we'll have to do it again.
I'd love to.
So
It's been great.
Thank you so much.
God bless you. Stay strong, courageous.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.